It's time now for a look at the day's top business news with Brian Quinn. And Brian, we're going to start with that story here in France. Easing of lockdown restrictions means not just getting back to our lovely cafe terraces, but also visiting a museum or taking in a film.
Indeed, it's been a long time. In fact, more than 9 months of closure for cinemas, one of the country's favorite cultural traditions. Well, as they reopen today, they're doing so with considerable health restrictions. No more than 35% capacity, with a maximum of 800 viewers per theater. No snack sales allowed. The cinema sector lost an estimated €1 billion in 2020 as attendance fell by roughly 70%. Another €500 million in losses is projected this year due to the latest lockdown. The government has stepped in to help with some €11 billion in bailouts for the cultural sector overall during the pandemic. On Wednesday, Culture Minister Roselyne Bachelot announced another €150 million in aid, with €80 million going to the film industry, $60 million for cinema operators, $10 million each for producers and distributors. The head of French cinema chain UGC says she knows the public is ready to get back into seats.
There's a very strong demand amongst the public. We've been hearing that they've missed us, that they've been waiting for us. So, for UGC, we've seen a reservation rate that is historically very high for the coming week.
Okay, well, let's take a look at how the markets are faring. Brian, what's the current picture?
Asian indexes mostly losing ground amid a fairly choppy week as investors look ahead to minutes from the latest Federal Reserve meeting in the U.S. today. That amid ongoing inflation fears. Singapore Airlines shares are down nearly 3% ahead of its latest full-year results. Exchanges in Hong Kong and Seoul are closed on Wednesday. The Nikkei in Japan ending the day down 1.5%.
Well, next Tuesday saw France host a major summit on how to finance Africa's economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Some significant measures were announced.
That's right. African heads of state and European leaders agreed to seek $100 billion in additional funding to kickstart economies across the continent, which shrank by an average 1.9% last year. The so-called New Deal would see stimulus funding initially intended for developed economies reallocated to African countries. The IMF, though, is warning that much more still needs to be done. Claire Rush explains.
The coronavirus pandemic is an emergency for Africa. The words of French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday as he wrapped up the last day of a two-day summit on financing African economies battered by COVID-19.
L'objectif de ce sommet pour nous était double: apporter des réponses de court terme et lancer une dynamique qui puisse véritablement créer ce New Deal économique et stratégique avec le continent africain.
This so-called New Deal comes on the heels of proposals initially agreed upon by world finance chiefs last month. Among them, the extension of a debt servicing freeze and an increase of $650 billion in special drawing rights. Known as SDRs, the international reserve assets are issued by the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, to the central banks of its member countries, as an asset that can be easily exchanged for hard currency with another central bank. Of the $650 billion SDR increase, however, only $33 billion will be allocated to Africa, a far cry from the financial shortfall of nearly $300 billion caused by the pandemic. To help fill in that gap, some wealthy countries, including France and Portugal, say they're willing to redirect their SDRs to African nations, up to $100 billion worth. Another key proposal, lifting patents on coronavirus vaccines to allow for their manufacture on the continent.
Il n'y a pas assez de mobilisation de ce côté-là de la part de nos populations. C'est une certaine inquiétude qui est due au fait, à mon sens, que le vaccin vient d'ailleurs.
The summit's participants hope the initiatives will help the continent's economies recover from the pandemic, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. The region's economy shrank by nearly 2% last year, its worst contraction on record.
Next, US President Joe Biden wants to get his country in gear when it comes to electric vehicle production.
Well, Biden called himself a car guy as he visited a Ford electric vehicle plant in Michigan Tuesday. He made the case with a turn behind the wheel of Ford's new electric F-150 pickup truck before taking to the podium to press the case for his $2.3 trillion jobs and infrastructure plan. Well, part of that plan is $174 billion in federal funding for the development of new domestic U.S. electric vehicle production, with a strong emphasis on battery technology. Biden warning that China is pulling ahead in the race for the future of the auto industry. Here he is.
But today, China has a bigger manufacturing scale than all other countries. And they're using that scale to make these batteries not just in China, but they're making them in Germany and in Mexico. And they're now exporting those electric vehicles around the world with sights on the American market. And they think they're going to win. But I got news for them. They will not win this race.
Well, finally, for business, Brian, you're suggesting that we could be soon flying away on used cooking oil.
It does look that way, perhaps. Air France KLM on Tuesday launched its first long-haul flight powered by sustainable biofuel. The Paris to Montreal journey taking off with 16% of its fuel supply consisting of synthetic jet fuel made from recycled cooking grease. The airline group is hoping to make 5% of its total fuel supply sustainable by 2030 as governments tighten emissions regulations on the aviation industry. Environmental groups, though, say that while it is progress, biofuels won't be enough to green the industry and that a big drop in air traffic is needed to reduce emissions. I believe the quote was, "There aren't enough fries in the world." Unfortunately, perhaps
Indeed, and
some more fries could be something. It could make some more fries.
Vicious circle there. We'll eat more. So anyway,
Yeah.
Brian Quinn with the Business News. Thanks indeed for that.